spring fire season for you. Appreciate you taking the time to be here today. So a couple quick housekeeping items. Please mute yourselves, and we'll use the chat to raise your hand and ask questions. And there's been multiple requests to record this session, so we'll be recording it and making it available at a later time and sending it out to you should you like to review the meeting of today. So a quick round of introductions. My name is Greg Carlson. I'm based out of Winnipeg. My role with Esri Canada is to enhance collaboration, data sharing, particularly with the provincial governments, but also with the federal government and municipalities. And this seems like a really good area of my role is to enhance collaboration across Canada on issues that are faced by many geospatial folks. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go around the call today to introduce everyone, but it's suffice to say that we have 7 provinces represented today, 2 territorial governments, and significant participation from the federal government, Natural Resources Canada. And I think there may be some public safety folks on the line as well. And we have a number of Esri folks from across Canada on the line as well. And Anthony Schultz from Wyoming will be leading the demonstration today. So essentially, just a way of background and purpose of today. Today's meeting is really to enhance your understanding of the Wildfire Aware app that was created in the States and is used in the States, increase your understanding of its functionality and capabilities. And Anthony Schultz, Director of the Wildland Fire Solutions for Esri Inc., will be providing a demonstration of the application. The second part of today's meeting is to communicate that Esri Canada is exploring options to adapt the U.S. application for Canada. And we're looking to hear from you if this application might be useful to you, if it meets some of your operational requirements, needs to support decision-making, and a communication tool to communicate information about fire management activities to Canadians. So with that, I'll pass the floor over to Anthony, and he'll be giving us a demo of the application. And following that, we'll have an open discussion on questions you may have, functionality you may have, and then just discuss some potential applications to Canada. So with that, Anthony, floor is yours.
Greg, like Greg mentioned, my name is Anthony Schultz. I'm the Director of Wildland Fire for Esri Inc. My background, just to give you guys a sense of where I came from, is heavy in fire management and operations. I'm a wildland firefighter by trade, so spent 6 years as the fire management officer for the state of Wyoming. So anything, right, I had all the planes and helicopters and all the cool stuff that you get to play with as a fire guy. And then that same work for the state of North Dakota for a couple of years. And then prior to that, worked and kind of bounced around the federal agencies. So worked with the Bureau of Land Management, United States Fish and Wildlife Service, our National Park Service, and some of the land management agencies like that. Luckily, Esri is kind in that they let me scratch my operational itch when I get the chance. And so I continue to try to stay relevant within the operations side of the house through my division group supervisor qualifications, and get to go out and play from time to time. As Greg mentioned, we're going to dive into the Wildfire Aware app. I'll kind of give you an idea of why we made the app, the suite of Aware apps that it joins, and we'll get into some of the functionality of the application itself. What I want folks to keep in mind as we go through is what you're looking at is really kind of the culmination of open data. It's taken us 20 years. Hopefully you all can avoid some of our pitfalls to get to the point where agencies like the U.S. Forest Service, the BLM, the National Park Service were comfortable sharing some of our fire information cross-boundary, right? So regardless of the color of shirt or hat you're wearing, it's one fire, one report. And in that way, we've kind of increased our data quality in the United States Fire Service. So with that, we'll get into the app. Want to see my screen, make sure that I've got the appropriate one shared. Give me a thumbs up. Thanks, Clark. All right, so as we go, I'd like to keep it pretty conversational. If folks have burning questions, feel free to stop me, or if I use acronyms that you all are unfamiliar with, please let me know. I will do my best to de-verify my language as we go through some of this stuff. But if something's confusing or I use acronyms, please, again, stop me or put something in the chat. And Clark, I might ask if I can ask you to monitor chat if folks type in questions or have item. Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so what you're looking at is our Wildfire Aware app. So Wildfire Aware joins the Esri Aware series out of our Living Atlas. If you're not familiar with the Esri Living Atlas, you should go take a look because it is awesome. It's really the largest collection of apps, maps, data, I think, in the world. A lot of those feeds are going to be live, so and global in nature. So the NASA VIIRS data set that we've incorporated here, we'll get into that in a little bit. But all of that lives within Living Atlas. And to kind of display some of the art of the possible with what's some of the capabilities that open data can bring, and we've compiled an Aware series. We have Hurricane Aware, Drought Aware, Air Quality Aware. We were missing Wildfire, though. And so this fills the wildfire slot and then serves as kind of a national situational awareness viewer for all current incidents and prescribed fires within the U.S. This is based, I'll start out with where we're getting our data. So where we're getting our data, it's all open source. If you navigate to the Wildfire Aware app within Living Atlas, you can see all of our sources right here. Got 22 different layers, and all of it is open from different sources around the U.S. So from everything from the ecosystem and the protected areas that we'll go through to our Census Bureau information, and then of course our live fire information. The live fire information you're seeing populated here, represented by assigned personnel, and we'll get into that metric in a second, is coming from a database called IRWIN, and Integrated Reporting Fire Interagency something, not important. But what it is it's a transactional database that every local municipality, every state agency, and every federal agency that has wildland fire responsibility is able to submit reports to, right? And when that occurs, we're able to then draw a lot of that information out via an API and populate it on the map like this. So it is in near real time. All right, so what are we looking at? In the United States, we have the ability to filter by incident type. And what I mean by incident type, we have a bunch of gold dots here. That's good fire, right? In prescribed fires. Now, a lot of it happening in the Southeast, and we've got quite a bit in Idaho, Montana region. And then we've got bad fire, or fires that we're managing for suppression. And you'll see those represented by our flame icons around the US. When we were developing it, we're having a really hard time figuring out how to display the most important fires at that time, having them populate at the top of the list and putting them on the forefront of people's mind, right? Because those are the ones that folks are going to have questions about. So to do that, we ended up sorting by personnel. And in the United States, personnel is a really good measure of the amount of effort it's taking to suppress, a given fire. And with that in mind, our fire management system is set up to favor fires towards the top of a national ranking priority list based on personnel ranking. So we thought, okay, well, agencies across the United States are reporting that personnel number as part of the data standard that gets submitted to that IRWIN transactional database I mentioned earlier, right? So, hey, what better way to try to give people looking at this map an idea of some of the more important fires across the U.S. So with that, let's take a look. I'm going to zoom in, and you'll note as we go, for all of you map nerds on the call, it's a custom base map. So it's scale suppressed, and you'll notice it changes as we kind of zoom in. We get some imagery. Moving in. All right, we're going to zoom in on the Sandy fire. Now, I was going through this morning, picking out good demo fires. We're starting to ramp up here in the U.S., not like you all are in Alberta just yet. But what you're looking at is a fire in southern Florida called the Sandy fire. to take a look at all of the information that we have available, right? So this fire has been reported to Irwin. That means likely the Florida Forest Service or the U.S. Forest Service National Park Service has submitted a incident report to an Irwin connected reporting system. It generates the report, and then from there, we start drawing all the metrics you're looking at on the right-hand side of the screen. So we're displaying the normal things you would expect to see about a fire, right? Day since start, the amount of personnel assigned, how many reported acres, percent containment, kind of normal metrics that you would expect to see when we start talking about fire. You're also looking at an authoritative perimeter. So the Irwin database has a few parts, right? So we have a data standard that agencies submit against. And then we also have what's called the National Incident Feature Service, which allows a lot of these reports to be generated in a spatial nature, meaning that anytime an agency updates that fire perimeter, it immediately displays here. Say we draw probably about every 15 minutes for updates, and you'll notice that change reflected here. So the last time someone touched this Sandy fire record through any connected application was May 1st at 1:15. So it is authoritative and updated right there. Now, what's interesting is we're also giving weather, right? And so to the, oh, do we have a question? I heard someone come off mute. Cool. So we're giving weather for today and expected weather for tomorrow. We're also giving the drought status in that area within the perimeter, right? We're going to go to a different fire to talk a little bit about the population subset analysis that we're running, but we're rolling up a report for the ecosystem, right? So what kind of ecoregion, what kind of landform type are we looking at? And then of course, land cover. It being in Florida, 84% of that is wetlands and 16% being forest. And we're getting a lot of this from the Sentinel satellites. We're just rolling up the land cover classes and displaying them out here in the information pane. We also go through predominant forest type group and then any kind of wildfire hazard potential that we have in the area. Wildfire hazard potential is a measure of fire risk in the United States, and it's produced by the United States Forest Service, the Northern Rockies Research Station out of Missoula, Montana. So giving people an idea of what the actual fire risk is in the area. And then we're taking a look at potential carbon loss. So we're calculating the amount of tons of carbon that stand to be released as a result of the footprint or the acreage associated with this fire. And then on top of that, we're looking at biodiversity issues, right? So are there any endangered species in the area? If there were, they would be displayed here. And then any kind of public lands that might be involved within that incident. I'm going to take you to, well, we'll stay here for a second because this is a good representation of some of the map layers we're allowing people to kind of delve into and get a look at. And so what we have options available, you can turn on and off perimeters, right? But then we're also bringing in that VIIRS data set. I mentioned that living VIIRS data set in Living Atlas earlier. You can turn on and off the satellite hotspots, and you'll see, it's kind of hard to see, but some gray hotspots here, right? That means that's older or colder VIIRS information. And then you'll see some satellite hotspots that are indicating they've been within about 24 hours. So you can get a sense of where the active parts of the fire are at that day. This is the VIIRS data set's 375 meter resolution, so it's not the greatest, but it does a pretty good job of giving individuals an idea of what might be the trouble spots that day on that fire. We're also giving census block information, and we'll go over that when we get into an area with population. On a more macro scale, we're giving individuals the ability to look at air quality today, nation, and then the projections for air quality tomorrow. Now, these are reflections of just general air quality. We didn't want to get into the business of some of our air quality sensor work and air resource advisor work that goes on for every fire or when fire is requested. The reason for that is we don't have a national database that's going to be as reliable to draw that information from as we do the actual air quality produced by NOAA and the EPA. That being said, a lot of that air quality is in fact a measure of ongoing fires, right? So by proxy, we're giving individuals a pretty good idea of the air quality as an effect of smoke in the air. We're also taking a look at any fire weather related watches and warnings. You can see the American Southwest here is under red flag warnings, which for us means high fire danger and conditions that would promote growth for fires. We're also taking a look at all of our fire burned areas. So Kansas has a lot of perimeters. See, bear with me on my internet. Not the greatest. I am in Wyoming. For a second. But this data set's coming from the NIFC open data site, and I can go over that in a bit. But what it is, it's a catalog of all of the spatial information that we have associated or discoverable via the National Interagency Fire Center. We're bringing all of that information in from fires that are reliable around 1984 and then onward, right? So anything before that, the data gets a little shaky. My internet's not cooperating, but you can see the individual fire parameters. Those with maybe a quicker connection are able to kind of zoom in. Right now, you're not able to tell the name of the fire or any metrics about that historic fire, but within a version 2 release, we're hoping to, on Hover, kind of populate some of that information that folks might be curious about for older fires. So let's zoom in, and we're going to take a look at some population centers. All right. So we're running, a lot of this analysis is generated by the incident. However, if you don't have an incident and just are curious about the population that might be affected should one occur, we're able to go ahead and click off, and we generate a 4-mile diameter circle on around the area of the click, right? And this is the population information I was talking about. So normally, if this were associated with an incident, we would be grabbing every census block that fire perimeter that gets uploaded by the managing agency. We'd be grabbing all of that population information, and we kind of slice it in a way that we think made sense for individuals looking to gain information about a fire. So here's the total population by census block within this 4-mile diameter circle. How many of that population is disabled? What's the poverty rate in the area? We've got the age breakdowns on Hover. And then what is the predominant language, right? Because that might facilitate issues with evacuations, and same with the vehicle, right? Are we going to have evacuation issues as a result of individuals being unable to relocate themselves? Doing that same kind of analysis for housing in the area, right? You can see there's 16,392, and Hemet's an expensive place to live, apparently. That's why I live in Wyoming. And then again, we get the ecosystem, right? But in this case, a lot of that is 70% of that is going to be developed area. So that's the population set. One of the other filters I didn't show you is that's our census block population, right? So if you wanted to know about what that population block looks like, you can get a sense of where the predominant population centers are by census block. These are scale suppressed, meaning that as we zoom out, a lot of this is going to turn off because it just doesn't become useful at that kind of scale. And there, my fire perimeters have finally loaded. So darker means more recent burn, lighter gray means it was closer to that 1984 time frame. And then kind of an Easter egg that we've also included is when fires actually get burning, the perimeters are represented in red. And what that does is gives us the ability, you'll see the building footprints are blocked out. Now, so in the United States, our Federal Emergency Management Agency, last July, I think it went live, it just published what's called USA Structures in the Esri Living Atlas. And what USA Structures is, it's a measure, of structures about 450 square feet total or greater, and they're detecting those building footprints with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and then blocking those footprints out, right? So we're bringing in a lot of that building footprint information, and you're able to zoom in and kind of see the affected structures on a fire when we get something in a population center that a perimeter wouldn't normally cover. So that's going to be, I like that. We're not doing any analysis on the actual housing units, right? Because we're getting a lot of that off of that layer, because we're getting a lot of that from the census block information. So uses. We've seen quite a few uses for this map in general. We've got a lot of news agencies. It's quickly become a good way to relay information and lighten the load on public information officers. You're able to zoom in to a certain scale or fire, and then the intelligence for that view, right, is going to be built in here to the URL, and you're able then to save that view, share it out, that specific link, share it out, and then on click, users are going to see the exact viewshed that you have pulled up here within the application, which is kind of a handy way for public information officers to go ahead and target specific areas of interest. We've also seen agencies throw it up in fire operation centers, right? So if you've got a dispatch center, this acts as a ongoing ticker for fire information, right? So if you've got a national scale, say at our National Interagency Coordination Center, they throw this up, and then as incidents get reported to that Irwin database, they pop up here, right? That real-time kind of ticker, if you will, of fire information. And by that same token, we're broken up into geographic areas across the US, which means those geographic areas or individual states are able to save that view, right? So if I'm in Wyoming, I'm able to save this view and then go ahead and just share that out to my fire operations center and have it up and just kind of watch for fires that are ongoing. So those are the two major use cases. We've also seen news agencies go ahead and embed it into some of their real-time fire information centers. So I believe the New York Times, the LA Times picked it up, and they've got it embedded just in their website, right? So folks can navigate, get information about fires. That's authoritative in nature, right? So as this gets updated, you're not getting a narrative about what's going on in the fire. You're getting raw data and a lot of just factual information about what's going on. All right, so sorting. We talked about personnel and the logic behind that. Fern and I, who's now departed, she's not with Esri any longer. She's out doing cool photography stuff. She's still with us here in a planetary sense. That being said, we're also giving users the ability to sort by date, name, and size of fire, right? So we didn't take any of that away. We were just having fall off issues in displaying some of the more important fires. So if anyone recalls, last year we had the Hermit's Peak fire, and size is how we default to sorting most fires in some of these situational awareness apps. That became quite the issue when that fire ends up being 300,000-400,000 acres and lasts for 4 or 5 months. And we had several of those. And it was just congesting some of the top fire important views, right? They're in mop-up stage. Agencies are still updating the record, so they're still current and very relevant to what's going on. They're just not as important or as of great of national significance than, say, sorting by personnel, right? So they might have 100 people on them, whereas fires that are 400 acres outside San Francisco with 1,000 people on it need to kind of filter to the top because that's our area of focus at the moment. So I think that covers the highlights. That's about a good half-hour run through. We do have an associated blog, so if folks are interested about a little bit more narrative form about where some of the data sources are coming from, I will go ahead and I'll drop that blog into chat so that you can peruse at your own leisure. And I guess I'll kind of end that demo with noting that, again, this took 20 years to get to this point. And what you're looking at is kind of the icing on the cake, or what's possible when agencies start sharing some of that information. Now, within the US, we do have a very operational view of kind of what you're seeing. And I should mention, we're looking to make this, the data set, this enriched data set, everything that you're looking here, the analysis that we're running, we're looking to make this available also in Living Atlas, which is going to be, I don't know, I'm kind of excited to see where folks take it, right? Within their old maps, that kind of thing. All of this code is available on GitHub. So the shell of what you're looking at from a UI, UX perspective is going to be available for everybody along with the data. I'm going to show you the NIFC Open Data website. Give you an idea of the kind of information that's available and where we draw some of it. So this is our National Interagency Fire Center's kind of data hub, if you will. It's an ArcGIS hub, and they've got some relevant data sources here that are also global in nature. Again, that PEERS data set, But they're serving up all of our historic wildfire information within the US. There's well over 300,000 records in some of these databases. It's fantastic. Again, this is all authoritative, and it comes from every hierarchy of government. It rolls up into NIFC and gets reported out here. We also have 2023 wildfires, right? So if you're looking to do some sort of analysis, again, updated May 9th, so today. If you're looking to keep current on some of the information that's going on this year, this is kind of the spot to find a lot of that information. So they've done a wonderful job in aggregating their open data. And like I mentioned, we do have operational views of all of this. So what you're looking at is more of the public information skewed kind of situational awareness viewer. We have this same style of capability within that National Incident Feature Service that I mentioned earlier, but it collects all then of the operational data by fire, right? So for this fire here, Burchard 519, should they have been collecting any operational data? Hey, here's my escape route, my safety zone. Here's a few helospots. Here's my medevac sites or dip sites for engines. All of that is going to be available within that National Incident Feature Service, and it provides really an operational slant or view rather to each one of these fires instead of the just the occurrence records and some of the just fact displaying that you're looking at here within the information pane. So with that, I will pause, and hopefully there's a bunch of questions.
Thanks, Anthony. That was a very informative demo. I quite like the aspect of bringing in those other values at risk, population information, and the building footprint was be quite interesting information. And I did note there was a bunch of pools in the backyards of those places, so that might be useful for some firefighting activities if you have to bucket out of a pool. But anyway, are there any questions, comments, feedback from folks on the call for Anthony?
Did that good of a job.
Dazzled them. I have a question with respect to the Irwin data, and I'm just wondering, can you comment on how organizations agree to data standards in terms of what information is supplied to that group? Don't mean to put you on the spot, but that seems to always be the challenge or the elephant in the room in terms of what data is provided, how is it provided, how did they reach consensus? Some of the folks on the call might be interested in learning that.
Perfect. So what you're looking at is our NWCG, National Wildfire Coordinating Group, Data Management Committee. So we have representatives from all hierarchies of government and from volunteer fire departments to state agencies to larger municipalities or smaller municipalities, and then most of our federal agencies participating in this data management committee. We've got a bunch of association folks, right? Because there's a lot of interests and a lot of different ideas about what should be included in a standard fire report as far as data reporting is concerned. So when I say it took 20 years, I'm not kidding. We've got some tremendous lessons learned and would be happy to connect people with the data management committee contacts if they're so inclined. But this is where all of those fights or rather discussions happen, right? The BLM lays out, our Bureau of Land Management lays out what they find useful in a fire report. So does the Forest Service. So does the state of Wyoming, the state of New Mexico. And so we've tried to break up our states by geographic region. And each one of those geographic regions gets one representative on a committee like this, right? So the West, I was the West's representative to some of our fire reporting efforts, which means that I had to collect requirements, desires, needs, complaints from the 17 Western states in the US. It's not a lot of fun. And then that same role existed for the Southeastern states as well as the Northeastern states. They all come together and we just hash it out, right? It was a lot of discussions about why we find things important and the best way to set up logic around some of those rules. And so I would heavily recommend an interagency effort. Rochelle, she's actually the chair for it. She's a paid position, but most of these are kind of collateral duties as a side, right? Everyone had a fire management job. Everyone's busy, especially during fire season, but there's still these 2-hour calls because the data piece is just as important sometimes. And so we all recognize that. You just contribute time, you slog through it, take notes, and by the end, you've got what hopefully amounts to some sort of document that agencies can submit against for fire reporting, and that works from local all the way to federal. We also kind of made some delineations, right? We found that there was just too much information to collect, say, from a volunteer fire department. And making the same ask of them in terms of time requirement isn't appropriate as, say, a full-time fire management officer like myself or a firefighter out on the line that's getting paid to be there and submit that work. So we ended up kind of drawing a line in the sand and say, okay, what's I'll call it the MVP, or the minimally viable product that we need from local volunteer fire departments to submit to really get at the questions that we need answers to, right? So where's the fire? How big is it? When did you put it out? Some of those basic information components, right? So we separated those requirements out and we said, okay, you can complete a basic report, right? Not to draw lines in the sand or to denigrate them in any way, but it's just a basic fire report, and you're going to meet all the requirements by submitting report A. If you are an eager beaver or a federal or state agency, you get to complete an advanced report, right? Which gets into a little bit more expanded requirement for data submission. And it adheres to the data standards that were agreed to at this data management committee. So that's kind of how that all works. And that's how it came to be. And that was some of the logic behind how we ended up where we ended up. Good question, because that's the heavy lift, right? It's always the data.
Yeah, it's all about the data. That's for sure. Thank you, Anthony. Any other questions for Anthony before we move into the second part of the discussion?
Yeah, hi, Aaron McMillan from BC Wildfire Service. I have a question about the AI-generated structure data set. Can you provide some more information on where you got that and how it works?
Yeah, of course. So this is Living Atlas. Again, this is what I referred to at the beginning. So what you're looking at here, it's all open data. Anyone can take a look at any of the maps in here. You can even do some of your own map making. It's when people are like, oh, open data. So we serve it all up. Anyone can see it. But when you start wanting to run your own analysis on it, so we ask that you have a user account with Esri. But for now, let's take a look at USA structures. There it is. And here is all of the actual description about the layer, right? So anything over 450 square feet, they're going ahead and mapping to those building footprints. And again, that they're not doing that by hand. That's done via some of the deep learning models. And if I'm not mistaken.
Can you throw that link in the chat window?
Yeah, of course. Let me go back here. So this is the link to the USA structures information. Again, it's from FEMA. Oops, did I get the right one? Yeah, I think I got the right one. Let me know if that works for you.
Yeah, no, I see that.
Okay, perfect. Let's take it a step further. I believe we have some deep learning models already pre-trained in Living Atlas. And I might have to get back with you, but I know they exist in Living Atlas that you can leverage. And I think one of them is the actual building footprint identification. And then we've got folks leveraging some of that for like damage, host fire, that kind of thing. So let me circle back with you and I will get you the actual link to some of our own at Esri, our own pre-trained deep learning models for building footprint identification. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. It's a challenge for us, so that we feel.
Yeah. Yep, of
dealing with for several years. So thank you.
course. Anybody else? Okay.
Okay, thanks
So there you
again,
go.
Anthony. That was fantastic. And if folks on the call have supplemental questions, certainly reach out to me and I can pass them on to Anthony. This moves us into the second part of the conversation today. As mentioned in the introduction, Esri Canada is looking at adopting the Fire Aware app created in the US for Canada. And I guess at this point, we're kind of kicking the tires. We're trying to gauge interest within Canada from the provinces, territories, and the federal government. If there's a business need or if this application would support operational requirements or decision making, or as Anthony mentioned, widely used in the States as a publishing tool to get information out to the public about fires. So I guess it's kind of an open discussion at this point. Interested in your feedback, your thoughts, comments, whether or not you see an application of the FireAware app for Canada. So I'll just kind of throw the floor open, and if anybody would like to speak to that, that would be great. So I see you're raised your hand.
Hey, Greg. So I'm over at Manitoba EMO, and it is a very interesting app. I'm just a little curious how it will be implemented in Canada. In the US, they do have a much more mature data management structure with a national emergency management strategy under FEMA. And I'm curious the data that be available nationally to support an app like that here.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's some of the things that Esri's investigating. We're looking at what data sources are available, what's available that could be as open data that could be brought into the creation of an app. So we'd be looking at the different data sources that would, could be used to develop the functionality of a similar application. So it's early stages. I think it's fair to say that we don't have the answer to that, and that's why we're starting to have these conversations to see first if there's interest, and B, then you start to scour and cast the net for data sets and those types of things. And that's why I asked the question on the data standards for fires. And I know there's other data sets that are getting drawn into the US version, but it's kind of we're kicking the tires early, and we recognize that it's going to be a challenge to look at data and find it. But I guess the first point is the interest from across the country.
I think there would be interest. Like, I don't want to speak on behalf of the whole province, but from a Manitoba perspective on emergency management, I see value and interest. But I'll say that with the caveat that as long as there's a national strategy that we can leverage with that open source data, because that's going to be, and that data management structure for interoperability, because that will be the biggest area of concern. And if that is developed, and I can see, and I don't want to speak on behalf of any other province, but I can see provincial bodies being quite interested, but that structure needs to exist.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. Yeah, certainly, as I mentioned, ground floor and those types of discussions, we need to look at. There's another hand up, Anthony.
Yeah, to that question, it's a really good one, but it only takes a few champions to get started, right? That's how it started in the US. And so after you gain adoption, say in the US, like one state wants to start sharing this data, and they nudge another state and they say, hey, what if we start all submitting our data, agree to their own data standard, and start the ball rolling? You get some national interest when you understand what's actually available or possible when you start sharing that data. And then, so to give you an example of what that looks like within our Wildfire Aware app, there was a lot of people who were initially resistant to that idea of sharing some of that data openly. But when they started to see some of the national reports get put out and a lot of the interest that was generated from it, they, oddly enough, came to the table and say, hey, how do we get some of it, right? So it was a one step at a time, gaining adoption in Canada's case, one province by one province would probably be a good start if you feel that there's going to be pushback. To add to that, a lot of the work in terms of data standards has been done in the US, right? And those are available. So I'd be happy to hand over all of the Irwin data standards and information that I have here to you all. And then you just take out a red pen and start, nope, we don't do that. We don't do that. That's not of interest, right? And then boom, you've got some sort of starting point from which to have the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be great if you could shoot that information to me and I can circulate the group. Any other thoughts or feedback from folks on the line?
Hey, Greg, there's a comment from John Little in the chat about the Canadian Wildland Fire Information Network, and it's a national strategy that collects data and shares it. So I think if there are places where an organization like Esri can scrape this data that's widely available, because we don't want to make, we certainly don't want to make this a make work project for anyone. If the data is available and it's easily accessible, then we're able to grab that data and use it. Very similar to how we do our community maps of Canada, where we scrape, up to 400 different municipality databases and grab the data for the national scale map. But John, if you have a few comments on that, can you expand a little bit on that? It'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I can. A number of years, well, predating the Canadian Wildland Fire Information Framework, working along with CIFC and all member agencies, we started what was called the Data Integration Project, and that was identifying a handful of key fire data sets where we would produce standards and start integrating those data sets and providing nationally through open standards. And so a number of years ago, I believe 2019, we started with funding this framework, which basically is what we're describing here. Focusing on making data accessible using standards. And so again, working through CIFC and all member agencies, developing standards for what identified as priority data sets. And so we, the Canadian Forest Service does make a number of these data sets available through open web services. Currently, the reported fires, which is a collection of all province, territory, and park reported fires, are currently available. We're currently working through CIFC to produce, well, we've produced standards for the fire polygon data. However, over the last year, we've gauged readiness for agencies to provide that data, and it's where all agencies aren't quite at the point of making that data available through this service. But yeah, as mentioned, there is an initiative that's well on its way through producing and developing services for such interest as this. I don't know if anybody else on the team or any agency wants to add to that, but I just thought it's important to note.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Justin, you turned your camera on. Did you have a comment?
No, I think John did a really good job. There's a lot of work in progress. I don't think all the standards are there yet and all the sharing agreements, but I mean, I'm hopeful and optimistic that as that develops over time with the framework, that we'll have the ability to fully can do everything that you've shown in the US for the US Wildfire Aware app. But yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate yours and John's and Clark's comments. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but leverage existing information that's made available already or will be made available down the road. We don't want to put an additional onus on any fire management activity to generate anything new or that type of thing. So it's really leveraging the good information that's already collected and potentially looking at creating an application that can be a benefit for Canada. We have another question. Bruce?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to follow on. I also work with Justin and John, and just wanted to, summarize a couple points. Is first of all, as John suggested before, for publicly available information, the CWFIS provides data currently through a data mart for publicly available data sets that others can use, and it's intended entirely for this kind of reason, which is we have our own business reasons. CIFC may have their own business reasons, but of course others can use that data and will continue to do so. And just the other point is, within this framework project, the intention here is to continue this good work through the data integration project to develop standards, which we've been calling in our lexicon MDS 30s, minimum data set, sort of gearing towards 30 fields, more or less, as there. And some of those are intended for public use. Of course, there's a bunch that are more geared towards people with mandate and fire activity, and those, and that's really what the framework is about, is to create a system where we share public data for whoever's use and application, whether it's just situational awareness, but also operational data that can help inform, when provinces and territories are facing fire as they are now. And just to say, there's lots of opportunity here. So I'll end it there. Thank you for the
Thank you, Bruce.
chance.
Any other, Henry, so you've got your hand up.
I had a question for Anthony. I was wondering, so in the US, as states and different agencies have joined and started sharing data through this, have you typically seen them migrate their data model to use the NWCG, or actually are they, as we see with many other workflows, are they sticking with their original and their bespoke data models and then just using ETL to make it work? Because I feel like there's often some hesitation to we've got a system, we don't want to change everything, but actually often ETL solves that.
Yeah, so no. So it initially started as like, hey, here's your carrot, right, to comply. Now it's more of a stick model, in the sense that if you're not reporting data to that standard, right, at least to the minimum data standards that we're asking for on the state side of the house, right, because much like provinces, states, we operate as our own entities, right? Wyoming is very different than Montana, and I can say, we're not doing it that way to the federal government. However, the federal government also holds some pretty mighty purse strings. And if you're not reporting data in a manner that is acceptable by what we've established as an interagency community as the minimum data standards, you become ineligible for a lot of grants nationwide, right? And your allocation of some of that support from the federal government to your state suffers as a result. That being said, we do have states that retained the way in which they are reporting. However, they do some ETL work to get it into that database, right? But that's all done on the state side with the understanding of, hey, here's what we need to end up reporting, right? So we do have a bit of an enforcement mechanism, but that followed on the popularity, rather, truthfully, of how we were submitting data. And then the value that was recognized from folks like the National Association of State Foresters, that represents all states in this kind of forum, right? And so that was the compromise that ended up being struck as some sort of enforcement model. So yes, but at this point, most states kind of adhere to the minimum data standards, and that's just kind of what's accepted at the state level.
Great, thank you. That's interesting.
Any other questions or comments, thoughts? Is there interest in continuing this conversation, maybe post-fire season, to explore again further application of the US version of the Wildfire Aware app to Canada. We're just trying to take a pulse of the nation here and just see if there's interest in having future conversations about that.
I'm going to jump in, Greg, to say I think I would like to have another conversation about this, but unfortunately, none of our fire ops people were able to join in today. I don't think. I think they're all in Lethbridge for some training, but certainly I think they would be more available during the off season. So I'd be keen to have another discussion maybe in the fall.
Yeah, it's a fair point. We debated whether or not to even have this session. To be honest, we know that folks are ramping up and are knee deep in it right now in certain areas of the country, but we thought we would at least start off with this conversation. And you're right. I think post fire season would be the time to kind of circle back and have some follow-up discussion. But thank you, Melanie, for that interest. Any other folks interested in carrying on the conversation once the fire season ends? Okay, well, starting to get a little bit of feedback about that. If you're shy, certainly just send me an email if you like. Let me know if you're interested. I think this has been an informative session. I know I certainly learned a lot from Anthony and the application of that particular app, Wildfire Aware app. And I think there's value in exploring whether or not it might be a good fit for Canada. And it sounds like with the CFWIS data set already, we were well on our way to leverage that. So unless there's any final comments from folks, I'll just have a quick pause here. Okay, I think we'll wrap things up. Again, thank you, Anthony, for taking time out of your day, and thank you everyone for participating. I know it's a busy time and it's much appreciated, and it helps to provide us with information to continue the exploration of developing a similar application in Canada. So with that, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll speak again. Bye, everybody.